So, a shipping error by Marantz might just have revealed once again one of high-end audio's most uncomfortable truths, and that is you get what you pay for, and you don't get what you don't pay for. The Link 10 streaming preamp arrived at my Lisbon door earlier this year instead of the SACD10, which I was expecting, and the 2 weeks before Marantz pulled the Link 10N back to base proved actually more enlightening than the 2 months I spent reviewing NAD's M66 last year.
This episode is brought to you by AudioQuest. The cable company believes great audio performance begins with great power. Visit AudioQuest.com for more information.
Now, at $14,000 US, the Link 10N costs exactly twice what NAD charges for its M66. So twice the price, let that sink in for a moment. Now the question isn't whether the Link 10N sounds better, because it does. The question is whether that improvement justifies writing a check for an extra $7,000 and for whom that extra $7,000 is worth it. So the Link 10N is a streaming preamplifier that prioritizes signal purity over digital convenience. So what we have in this big and extremely heavy box is Marantz betting that some listeners still want their streaming preamps to be unsullied by DSP. So that means no room correction and no fancy bass management. So just streaming, a DAC, and in this case a phono stage, all fronting an old school hi-fi ideal. Now you might ask, what about the single RCA subwoofer output you see on the Link 10N's back panel? So I see that more as a courtesy and not for cleverness, because there's no DSP crossover and no phase adjustment. There's just a variable signal with low pass filter options from 40 to 120 Hertz, and I think you can ramp those up in 20 Hertz increments. Now, as we know, physical presence matters in high-end audio, and at 33 kilos to the NAD's 8 kilos, the Link 10N makes the M66 feel like a flyweight stepping into the ring with a heavyweight, and that's 73 pounds versus 17 pounds for our American viewers. Now those 33 kilos come from two toroidal transformers, one for the digital boards and the other for the analog boards, but also the copper shielding found in the triple layer chassis, I think that's what it's called, and its isolated sub enclosures. Because if you pop the lid on the Link 10N, you'll find yourself looking at sort of audio engineering as architecture. You'll see separate compartments for different circuit blocks, each one physically shielded from its neighbour's electrical noise. Now the NAD's internals look tidy but pedestrian by comparison. So if you put the two units side by side, it's like comparing a well-organised dad garage to computer-optimised warehouse storage. Now both preamps here offer balanced and single-ended connections, and both run fully balanced signal paths, and both sport the mod cons of HDMI ARC, coax, Toslink and USB. Now the NAD adds AES EBU to the mix, while Marantz offers dedicated line level outputs. And each unit streaming board supports Roon Ready, Apple AirPlay 2 and the Connect services that come from Spotify, Tidal and Qobuz. And everything else lives inside each manufacturer's app. So HEOS for Marantz and BlueOS for NAD. Now, neither of these apps will win interface awards, but they get the job done and are useful, for me at least, for occasional settings tweaks. And I feel the same way about the infrared remote controls. Nothing special to look at or to hold, but still useful. And for many people, useful is enough. Now the front panels tell very different stories. NAD's touchscreen feels contemporary, responsive, and almost smartphone-like in its immediacy, whereas the Marantz's screen isn't touch and it has to make do with twin D-pad controls that I find occasionally frustrating to use. That said, the aluminium rotaries feel significantly more luxurious than NAD's plastic knob, and that tactile superiority extends pretty much to every surface of the Marantz. And so Marantz didn't just double the price, they doubled down on build quality. But we don't listen to casework, do we? So setting up my side-by-side comparison, I ran both units balanced through the NAD M23 power amp and into a pair of Vivid Kaya 90 floor standers. So the M66 ran pure, so no DSP engaged, and that effectively allowed it to meet the Link 10N on equal terms. And I built a playlist in Tidal and played it back via Roon and a Nucleus One server. And Roon Remote sent the streams to each preamp's Roon ready input, and my test playlist pulled from across the musical map. So I included Frank Sinatra's That's Life for vocal presence, Placebo covering Robert Palmer's Johnny and Mary for, I guess, guitar rock density, and then Deadbeat remixing Robert Palmer, and then Chris Isaac's Wicked Game for a sense of atmospheric space, and Lowe's Time is the Diamond for sparse indie melancholy. And then I added the Horrors Sea Within a Sea for sort of wall of sound indie rock dynamics, and Cannes Moonshake for krautrock propulsion. And then I rounded the whole playlist out with some ambient techno from A Positive Life. That's a track called Aquasonic, absolutely superb, and that was mainly to test low frequency control. And I would like to thank Roon for sponsoring this video. Now, the audible differences between these two units emerged pretty much immediately, actually, and obviously. So through the Link 10N, Sinatra's voice carried proper chest resonance. The M66 presented the same voice with less body and sort of more forensic detail, but it lacked the connective tissue that makes music sound and feel whole, or rather the illusion of music in a room. And no, switching between these two preamps wasn't a night and day transformation, but it was the kind of difference that you'd notice between a good restaurant meal and a great one. Both satisfy, but only one leaves you thinking about it for a long time afterwards. So the Horrors' already lean indie rock sounded comparatively ectomorphic through the NAD, so sort of all bones and elbows, whereas the Marantz, on the other hand, put meat on those bones. And Lowe's slowcore is sparse at the best of times, but heard through the M66 next to the Link 10N, it came across as skeletal. It lost the weight that makes this duo's minimalism sound meaningful. And even with bass heavy material like Deadbeat's dubbed out remixes of Robert Palmer, the NAD couldn't match the Marantz on a sort of like foundational solidity. So the M66, I think, pulls music apart to let us examine the pieces, but the Link 10N keeps it all together while revealing just as much detail. Now we might ask why these two units sound so different. So the NAD employs an ESS 9038 Pro chip at the heart of its DAC. That's a chip that can be found in countless other high-end products. But Marantz takes a different path. It uses something called the Marantz Musical Mastering Decoder, which sounds kind of fancy, but essentially it works by upsampling everything to DSD 256 before running the result through a low-pass filter. So no off-the-shelf DAC chip. And it's not just DAC differences between these two units. Marantz avoids op-amps wherever possible, so it swaps in its proprietary HDAMs, and that's code for Hyper Dynamic Amplifier Modules. So these are discrete component circuits that Marantz claims deliver superior speed and vibration resistance, at least when compared to chip-based op-amps. Now, whether it's the conversion philosophy, or the discrete circuitry, or a better power supply, or stricter board isolation, the Link 10N sounds more substantial, more refined, and more complete than the M66. But here's the rub. If we engage the M66 Dirac Live or add a properly integrated subwoofer, the gap between these preamplifiers narrows. So the NAD skeletal character is obscured once DSP starts massaging the signal, or when a subwoofer is pressed into service. But my side-by-side comparison ran both units naked, so no room correction and no subwoofer assistance, because this revealed each preamplifier's essential characteristics, their DNA. But in the real world, where most of us battle imperfect rooms and need help below 40 Hz, the M66's digital intelligence might matter more than the Link 10N's analog purity, because the Marantz only pulls decisively ahead when both preamps play by the same purist rules. But here's where the value calculation gets a bit complicated, because the M66 offers real DSP smart, so Dirac Live room correction, that contain bass resonances and correct speaker group delay issues, and its sophisticated bass management works for up to 4 subwoofers. So if your listening room suffers from low frequency standing waves, and most do, or if you need to integrate multiple subs, or if you're unable to treat your space acoustically, then stop listening now to this video, stop listening to me, and go and buy the NAD. It remains the smarter purchase for most real world situations. But for those of us blessed with good rooms, or those of us who've invested in acoustic treatment, or those who trust discrete components over op amps, or those who don't want their DAC built around an off-the-shelf chip, the Link 10N justifies its premium, because the Marantz succeeds by doing less but doing it better. So no room correction and no bass management and no digital band-aids for acoustic problems, just exceptional build quality and innovative conversion technology. And the kind of meaty sound, the meaty refined sound that makes you forget about the gear and remember why you started listening to music in the first place. And yes, that is horribly cliched, but in this case, it's true. At twice the M66's price, the Link 10N delivers what might be almost twice the performance, as long as you're measuring performance in musical satisfaction rather than feature sets. So for the shrinking breed of purist listeners with treated rooms and healthy bank accounts, the Link 10N makes a compelling case that leaving out the room correction and subwoofer integration can matter more than including them. Anyway, that's all from me for today. Like and subscribe according to your preference, and don't forget to hit us up on Patreon if you'd like access to the playlist used for this review, because we have versions for Tidal, for Qobuz, for Apple Music, for Spotify, and for YouTube Music. And those playlists also feature the music heard in this video's interludes. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching. Okay, let's round out this video with one very important thought. So my experience with the Link 10N contradicts the copium-laced sermons of those who insist that high-end audio is a scam and that its buyers are all idiots. Because no, a WIM UltraDAX preamplifier outputs are not 90% as good as the Link 10Ns. They're not even 50% as good as the NADs. And I know this because I've done those side-by-side comparisons too. So if you actually put this preamp, the Link 10N, into your system, the difference between it and the half-priced NAD isn't subtle or psychological or imaginary. And after 2 weeks of swapping cables back and forth like some kind of hi-fi lunatic, I kept returning to the same conclusion, that the Marantz made me want to keep listening to music, whereas the NAD made me want to analyze what I was hearing. And yes, 14 grand for a streaming preamplifier sounds insane until you've heard what 14 grand can buy. So not only prestige and not only bragging rights, but a fundamentally more convincing reproduction of recorded music. And those who dismiss such differences without experiencing them for themselves will save themselves a fortune. But they also deny themselves the reality that we really do get what we pay for.